Great. Okay, so again, welcome. This is our first class on Chapter 9. We've actually divided Chapter 9 into two parts because it is quite a long chapter, but it's also a very intense chapter. I'm kind of gearing myself up to teaching this. I've only taught it once before, but it's fun to go back in and sort of see how I taught it last time. I've got more resources this time that I can look at as well. So there might be some differences here and there, but hopefully we'll be able to manage it within the time that we've allotted for it. So we're going to start tonight with a recitation of the Heart Sutra. Again, the Heart Sutra is on emptiness, which of course is the main topic of this chapter on wisdom. And so this is also a very powerful way to remove any obstacles so that hopefully we can all make it through the study of this chapter, gain some realizations of the topic of emptiness, and help other sentient beings. So let's go ahead and recite this together, again, bringing to mind the meaning of the words as we recite it. I prostrate to the Arya triple gem. Thus did I hear at one time. The Bhagawan was dwelling on Massive Vulture's mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagawan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara, looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara: how should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Sharadvatiputra: Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly, beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty. Emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element, and so on, up to and including no mind element, and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the end point of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly completely awaken to unsurpassable perfect complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared: Tayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Swaha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagawan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that. It is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom, just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagawan having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharadvatiputra, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara, those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagawan. So then I'll scroll up to the, whoops, went too far, the short mandala offering. So again, it's also very auspicious at the beginning of a teaching to make a mandala offering to all of our gurus, all the holy beings, the Buddhas, so we can receive their blessings and actualize these teachings in our own mind. But of course, we'll also do this before all of the teachings. It's just good to create that merit so that when we receive the teachings, we're in the best position to create realizations from them. So let's recite this with the visualization of the purified world that we're offering to these holy beings. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon, I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. And then refuge in Bodhichitta before the teaching. We'll do this once in English, twice in the Tibetan, bringing to mind these 2 thoughts of sincere, heartfelt refuge in the 3 jewels, especially the Dharma, which is our main refuge in our practice. And then the second 2 lines where we think about bodhicitta, and we'll also meditate on this shortly, but already bringing to mind the idea that we're engaging in these teachings solely for the purpose of helping all sentient beings, and the recognition that we have to become a Buddha in order to do that. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chanyen gipe sonam gi dola penchir sangye drupar shog sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi Daki chanyen gi pe sonam gi dola panchir sangye drupar shog. Okay, good. I don't know if you can hear the thunder here. We're getting really unusual rain, which is great. So I hope the power doesn't go out. If it does, hang in there in the Zoom room and I'll try to re-enter or something. But anyway, all right. So again, we'll do a short meditation on bodhicitta before we begin. So spend the first few minutes focusing on the breath, whatever way that you use to focus the mind using the breath. And then after a few minutes in silence, I'll come in and lead you in a short reflection to strengthen our bodhicitta motivation. So now let's set our motivation of bodhicitta. And recall how it's bodhicitta that actually makes everything that we're studying into the cause for enlightenment, into the cause for generating these 6 perfections that we're studying in this text, especially the perfection of wisdom that we're studying tonight. If we examine them, we can see that many people practice generosity, giving. But what makes it a perfection of generosity is when we do that with bodhicitta. Many people practice good morality, patience, joyous enthusiasm, concentration. But if we want it to become a cause for enlightenment, we have to unite our study of those and practice of those with the mind of bodhicitta. So now as we begin our study of this 6th perfection, what is said to be the most important perhaps of these 6, because it is with the perfection of wisdom that we are actually able to attain the result that we seek. It is one of the main causes, because without it, we will continue to practice the other perfections, but never achieve the result. And there are even those who develop the wisdom of emptiness who don't have bodhicitta, those on the Hinayana path, those who have the goal of their own individual liberation, which is a noble goal, but it overlooks the reality that we are all in this together, that everyone is suffering the same as us. Everyone is blocked from achieving their greatest potential the same as us. So if we want our investigation into emptiness to bring about the results of Buddhahood, it's imperative that we generate bodhicitta. So in your own mind, think about the vast number of sentient beings. We can't possibly imagine every single one of them. But we know that all these beings are not enlightened. They haven't achieved their greatest potential. But every one of them can do that. Every one of them, ourselves included, has bodhicitta, has the ability to develop this mind on the basis of their Buddha nature. Every one of them can have that mind, can develop their minds to that degree, because we all do have this fundamental purity that we call our Buddha nature. So because everyone can develop bodhicitta, because everyone can progress on the path, because everyone can eventually achieve Buddhahood, we can generate this mind with complete confidence that the goal that we seek for ourselves, as well as the goal we seek for others, can be completely attained without a doubt. So we generate that mind that aspires to do this for the sake of all beings, develop ourselves completely, especially to gain this perfect understanding of the wisdom realizing emptiness, so that we then can be dedicated to helping all sentient beings to achieve complete enlightenment. Okay, good. Again, welcome to this first class, embarking on chapter 9. So again, this is one of the most important chapters of the text, and it's also perhaps the most profound. I think it definitely has a lot of profundity to it. We'll make our way through it using a number of resources. So what I would like to do to get things started is I've put together, as usual, a little slide presentation that can kind of steer us in the right direction. The first thing I want to touch on again tonight is, most of you have heard this before, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but I want to make sure that those of you who are new, that you recognize that this is being offered as part of the FPMT basic program. And if you have an inclination towards doing that for certification, I'm going to go through very quickly what's entailed in that. Then do an overview of the entire text, since again, some of you might be coming in new for this chapter in particular. Just where does this chapter sit in regard to the rest of the text? And then finally, we'll get into chapter 9. So I'm hoping to do these first 2 things very quickly. Whoops, hit the wrong thing there. Oh, There we go. Yeah, that was the first topic. Yeah, the basic program. This again was devised by Lama Zopa Rinpoche for Dharma students, and a number of geshes also gave some input into it. And it's for students who wish to progress beyond introductory courses and are ready to commit to more in-depth study and practice. As the second bullet point says, it's a text-based approach to the philosophical aspects of the Tibetan Buddhist Golokka tradition, which is a tradition that follows Lama Tsongkhapa that the FPMT is a part of. So it's a little different than some of the other studies that we have because it is text-based. There's a study component which entails 9 core curriculum subjects, of which this text is one of those 9, and then 3 supplementary subjects. Again, you can find more information on all of this at fpmt.org, where you can see what all the individual texts are and so on. There is a subject completion test. Of course, for this one, we probably should have been doing tests as we go through it because it's quite huge. But those of you who do want to take a subject completion test at the end, we'll figure out a way for that to happen when we conclude with chapter 10 and have maybe even some sessions to do some review of what we've studied, kind of paring it down into some lesser material so you wouldn't have to study the entire text. And then I also try to incorporate homework and reading assignments as much as possible, as well as meditations, but certainly for the study component, it's mostly the homework, reading assignments. We haven't been able to incorporate discussion so much, but maybe we'll try to do that for this course, because this one in particular on chapter 9 would be really useful to have some discussion. There's a 3-month final review at the end when you have completed all 9 subjects. And in that final review, you go over all of the individual texts and refresh your memory of all those, studying for the final exam, which is the culmination of it. The second of the 4 components is an ethical behavior component, which essentially involves refraining from the 5 lay vows, which are to not kill, not steal, not engage in adultery or other forms of sexual behavior that are unwise. And then the 4th one, to not lie. And the 5th, to not partake of intoxicants, alcohol, substances that distort the mind. So again, those are the main things that we're encouraging people to do. If you can't refrain from those in your entire life, at least refrain from them when you are engaging in your study of this text and in the classes and what have you. Practice component, again, I do try to give out meditations every week, or at least direct you to what would be a good meditation to do to support your study of this material. We haven't been able to incorporate practice days, short retreats, but again, maybe that can be something we can look at the tail end of this to figure out a way to incorporate some of that. For the entire basic program, there is a 3-month Lam Rim retreat component, which can be done as 3 individual 1-month retreats or as a full 3 months sequentially. And this can be done after you've done the text on the Lam Rim, the middle-length Lam Rim of Lama Tsongkhapa, the stages of the path study is really essential to doing a Lam Rim retreat. So you can't do that before studying that, but once you have taken that course in particular, then you can engage in your retreat in a way that suits your schedule. The service and training component has also been hard in this online format that we're doing, but to in some way, if you can, contribute to the administration of the basic program by doing guided meditations, leading discussion groups, other activities. So again, that's something that is easier when it's in a center when you're running those sorts of things, but online it becomes a little more complicated. So again, for each individual subject, I don't take attendance. It's on an honor system, but try to attend as best as you can through this. If you miss a session, all the videos are posted, so you can catch up that way. There's a meditation requirement. Again, that's on an honor system. I don't have people filling out a card as to when they meditated and what they meditated on. The behavior requirement that I mentioned earlier, and then of course the tests that would need to be done at the tail end of this subject in order to pass this subject of it's called Engaging in the Bodhisattva Deeds. It's another translation of Shantideva's text. It's usually called A Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. But anyway, you would have to take a subject completion test for that. And then again, for the entire program, completing all 9 subjects, participating in that 3-month review that I mentioned, passing the final exam, and then completing the 3-month Lam Rim retreat or 3 1-month Lam Rim retreats. Now, again, you might wonder, well, what's the advantage of getting certification? Well, you get a pretty little certificate that actually Lama Zopa designed. It's very nice, actually. And but beyond that, you also can then apply to become a registered teacher for the FPMT if you feel inclined to do that. This would be one advantage that you would have. And then, of course, if you have passed the basic program and gotten your full certification, then my understanding is you can teach things that are at that level or below that level. So you could teach Discovering Buddhism for a center or what have you. So just know that this is something that is an advantage that we should look at if we are inclined to want to do it for that purpose. There are no guarantees that you'll become a teacher, but if you would like to at least go through the process of finishing the course and then applying to become a registered teacher, that's a possibility. Okay, so let's go through an overview of the text. Again, the first 3 chapters I went through in October of 2019 in a weekend course at Shantideva Center in New York. All those recordings are available if you'd like to watch them. This is not the sort of text that you have to have done the previous chapters in order to study this one. So don't get the feeling that you need to leave because you haven't covered all this material if you weren't at these other courses. Just know that, again, each of these do build to some degree on the basis of Bodhisattva behavior, but they are still nonetheless quite standalone chapters in general. The first 3 chapters, again, have to do with explaining Bodhichitta, which is the mind we meditated on, the mind that is the basis for all of our Bodhisattva behavior. So again, I'm not going to read everything on the screen. These are just my standard notes that I have from this. Chapter 2 is an explanation of how to prepare the mind for cultivating bodhicitta by eliminating the negativities that impede its development. It does involve all 7 of the 7 limbs, but one of the main of those is our confession, or wanting to purify our negativities. And so that is a major part of chapter 2. The 7 limbs continue into the beginning of chapter 3, and then there's advice about how to fully accept and make a commitment to the bodhisattva path. So those 3 chapters go well together because they're sort of setting the stage for the entire text, the foundation of bodhicitta and our desire to uphold it and continue to practice it. Then in terms of chapter 4, we went through 4 and 5 together as an online course at the beginning of 2020. Conscientiousness, it's an admonishment to conscientiously maintain one's bodhicitta and prevent it from decreasing. So we had the initial thing of trying to develop it and then to uphold it and not let it diminish. And then to also have guarding introspection. That's what's taught in chapter 5. It's an explanation of how to guard your behavior with watchfulness and vigilance, kind of being attentive to what we're doing. And it essentially covers the second of the 6 perfections, which is the perfection of morality or ethical discipline. The first perfection, the perfection of generosity, isn't really taught as a separate chapter, but in the 10th chapter, when we get to doing the dedication chapter, it is a part of that, of dedicating, giving away, being generous with all of our merits that we've accomplished through studying this text. Then we went on to the patience chapter, which is chapter 6. We had a separate course for that in the middle of last year. Joyous effort also towards the summer of last year, latter part of the summer. And then concentration, which is what we just finished at the end of last year. So those 3 perfections, the 3rd, 4th, and 5th perfections, are really essential to our practice as well, to have a very patient mind that is tolerant in the face of harm and so on, joyous effort and enthusiasm, a perseverance in our practice, and then especially to apply that to developing meditative stabilization or concentration. And now we go on to the 6th perfection, which is the 9th chapter, the perfection of wisdom. And then the 10th chapter, which will include at the tail end of the rest of chapter 9 later this year. This indicates the way to train in the mind of giving your body and resources as well as all your virtue to others, and the way to train in generosity that is qualified specifically by our dedication, dedicating all of these merits to the welfare of others. So we are now then, in terms of the perfections, that there was an outline in Gyaltsab Je's text, the way of training in the remaining 4 perfections, which came after our study of chapter 5. And this covered 6, 7, 8, and 9. And again, we are now embarking upon chapter 9. So the six perfections once more, just as a recap: generosity, morality, patience, joyous effort, concentration, and wisdom. And just to remind you that they are set out in terms of those that are easier to practice in general are taught first, because it's easier for us to give initially, to give resources, what we can, to give protection, to give the Dharma, and then to practice good morality, a pure morality where we're not harming others and so on, refraining from any misbehavior. Patience gets to be harder to practice in the face of suffering or harm, to keep the mind stable and undisturbed. And then joyous effort, to really put this unbridled enthusiasm into our practice. Concentration, as we saw when we studied it, is also a very difficult thing to fully develop to the degree that we need to have it, the mind of calm abiding. And then wisdom, of course, which we're again setting out on this rather profound and difficult chapter that teaches us how to cultivate the wisdom, realizing emptiness. So let me see if there are any questions on those before anything about the basic program or about where we're at in the text. Good, that didn't take too much time. So let's jump back into it then. All right, no questions? Okay. So let's go ahead and go through the wisdom chapter. And I do have a little note on this that I thought I'd share for this and the next course on the rest of chapter 9. I'm really requesting, and especially students who want to take the basic program certification, to read His Holiness's, there are two published commentaries of his on chapter 9. And this is by far the better one, Practicing Wisdom, at least in my estimation. It was published by Wisdom Publications, and unfortunately, it's not in stock at Wisdom, or you can maybe find used copies at a premium on Amazon or other used internet vendors, used book or new book internet vendors, but it's rather hard to find. But know that right now, at least last time I checked it, they do have it available as an ebook for $9.99, which is quite a deal. And so if you're okay with reading on your e-reader, whatever that might be, then that would be a good way to be able to read this book. While I'm at it, I do want to go ahead and share the book list as well that I supplied to the folks at Shantideva, and they've gotten those up on the website. So again, this is something that I'm also encouraging you to have, and you don't need to spend a penny for this. The Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, again, the same name for this text is what it's called in the FPMT. This is Shantideva's text. It's translated from the Tibetan by Stephen Batchelor. It's been around a long, long time. And I find it really useful due to the way he sets out chapter 9. He doesn't keep it in full verses. He's got a few bits where they are in verses, but a lot of it is in the form of a debate, and it can be really useful. I'll put some of it on the screen right now. He explains at the beginning, why he does it this way, and you can see it goes into verse 2 becomes this whole paragraph, as opposed to a verse like verse 1 is, which is on that for that screen now. So again, it's really quite helpful, I think, to have it, and you can download it for free using the link that is on this document that, again, you can get from Shantideva's website. So you can then print out chapter 9 if you'd like, if you want to have a hard copy in front of you, but it's really useful. If you don't have the book, I would encourage you to do that. There are commentaries, again, from the Golokka tradition, and actually I did find that one of them I listed later is more Golokka than anything. But anyway, the two by His Holiness, again, Practicing Wisdom, and then what was originally published as Transcendent Wisdom by Snow Lions Publications is now Perfecting Wisdom. So you got Practicing Wisdom and Perfecting Wisdom. Practicing Wisdom is the one that I really want you to read, again, so you can link to that and purchase it if you'd like to get the ebook if you don't have a hard copy. The Perfecting Wisdom is a republication of that much earlier translation. It's not bad, it's just a different translator. Alan Wallace translated it, and some of the language that he uses is not as consistent with what we're going to see in our text. There are still going to be differences with our text, but nonetheless, it's a much shorter commentary too. And I find that the later one is actually much, much better. So know that you can obtain that one in a hard copy right now because it's been republished as part of the series of the Dalai Lama's writings. But anyway, I would again, much rather you read the first one on that list, Practicing Wisdom. The commentaries from other traditions. Now, before I go into this, I might do a little caveat here. One thing that we always learned, and we had, we're told this again and again in our study in the master's program, was that it's really best to learn your own tradition quite well before you go jumping to another tradition. And the reason being that if you have two texts in front of you from two different traditions, it can sometimes get a little mind-boggling if you don't know for sure what your tradition is saying. And the Golokka tradition has a very particular slant on this chapter, in particular because of the way the two truths are presented. Emptiness is presented is very much in line with everything else that Lama Tsongkhapa taught on emptiness. So know that you will get that as part of this course, and that's what I'm going to be emphasizing. If you feel like you've got enough sort of grounding in emptiness to take on another tradition, then by all means you can do that. But that won't be the main text that I'll be referring to. Only at times will I refer to it, I'm sure, are any of these from other traditions. So let's go ahead and go back to that list, and I can emphasize a few things about that. The first one is from the Nyingma tradition. Again, the four traditions of Tibetan Buddhism are the Nyingma. They're the literally means the ancient ones. It's the very first school of thought that developed in Tibet in the 7th, 8th century. Padmasambhava, and so on, all of these great masters. It's still around today, and they are very, they have their way of approaching this that again is going to be a little bit different. It has some of the same fundamental teachings, but you may see things that will be different in Jamgon Mipam's commentary. So again, that is available. That wasn't published all that long ago, I don't believe. Then there was a book that I was able to obtain quite a few years ago that was actually published originally by the Padmakara Translation Group for the teachings that His Holiness gave in Practicing Wisdom. So in Practicing Wisdom, if you haven't read the beginning yet, you'll hear that these are the two texts that His Holiness is referring to as he's going through his commentary. Again, you don't need to read these additional commentaries beyond Practicing Wisdom, but you might find it interesting to see what the actual texts are like in terms of the first one that's mentioned there, the Nectar of Manjushri speech by Kenchan Kunzang Peldin. And that one has been republished in a book that's called The Nectar of Manjushri Speech, which is Shambhala Publications has. So you can obtain that, and that way you'd have, and that actually is the entire text, but you could study using the chapter 9 in particular, and that is from the Rimé tradition. Rimé means sort of non-sectarian. It's sort of taking all four of these schools that I mentioned, or I didn't mention all of them, the Nyingma, the Kagyu, the Sakya, and the Golokpa, taking all four of them and studying all of them and not really being attached to any particular tradition. So Rimé means sort of non-sectarian. So that one is definitely a non-sectarian text, the first one, the Nectar of Manjushri speech that's mentioned there under item 2. Under the second one under item 2, The Brilliant Torch by Minyak Kunzang Sonam, he's actually more in line with Golokpa. He actually studied Golokpa extensively, though he too was a bit of a Rimé practitioner, had all four schools that he studied with. But this is definitely based on the Golok presentation. So again, that's very hard to obtain this original book that had just the commentaries on the 9th chapter, but that commentary on the 9th chapter from Minyak Kunzang Sonam has been published in its entirety by Douglas S. Duckworth has done the translation, and it's translated in a book called The Profound Reality of Interdependence, and he also gives an introduction to that. But know that that one is actually much more Golokpa than Rimé, even though he was a Rimé practitioner. So again, the main things I would emphasize is, download your or get a copy of Stephen Batchelor's translation, so you have that to refer to as we go through. Secondly, to get His Holiness's second commentary, which was again Practicing Wisdom. It's the first on the list, but the second one that was published. So that would be the one that I would encourage you. And if you do have, oh, was there a problem with the link? Oh, it didn't work. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, I'll have to check and see what I have wrong on the link, and I can update my file and send it to you then, Sneh, so that you've got the right one out there. So, okay, I'll click on that myself to make sure that I go there as well. All right. So any questions on the books before we proceed and actually get into our study of this? again, I don't want to overload you with reading, so don't feel again like you have to get all these other commentaries. But if you've studied this before, I actually am really finding the Douglas Duckworth translation to be quite a useful book. Um, for example, on the section on the two truths, whereas many of the other writers don't have much to say, he's got like, I don't know how many pages it is. He keeps going on and on about different things about the two truths. And it's really quite well translated. I don't know him. I'd never seen anything translated by him before, but anyway, it is a bit expensive. I think it was a bit cheaper some months ago when I got my copy, but you can get, I think even the Kindle version was like outrageously expensive. So, okay. So let's go back into the text or into the slides here. Before I get into talking about all of this, I do want to introduce you, those of you who've never studied the Tenets course in basic program. There's a presentation of Tenets text. Tenets are essentially the philosophical schools of Buddhist thought. These things were kind of looked at in retrospect. After the Buddha passed away, centuries after, they look back at what all the Buddha taught, because he taught for 45 years and he taught to a variety of people with different dispositions. And so they kind of systematized 4 different ways of looking at the Buddha's teachings. 2 of these tenet systems were Hinayana, meaning that they do primarily focus on those of the Hinayana lineage who want to attain individual liberation, although they do teach a path to Buddhahood. But what delineates them most from the Mahayana tenets is that they don't subscribe to the idea of an emptiness or selflessness of phenomena beyond persons. They primarily focus on mistaken ideas we have about the self, the I, and other people, but not on the whole idea of how phenomena exist. They don't really question as much how phenomena exist in their final nature. So these 2 schools, the Vaibhashika and the Sautrantika, are a little more primitive in a sense, and they have different ways of talking about the 2 truths and so on. If you want an introduction to that, in that book, The Nectar of Manjushri's speech, he does go into a brief overview of how each of these schools looks at the 2 truths, which is going to be, again, the first topic we're going to see coming up towards the beginning of our chapter 9. The other 2 are Mahayana tenets, Chittamatra and Madhyamika. You may have heard of Chittamatra as the mind-only school, and of course the Madhyamika or Madhyamika is the middle way. These 2 go on to propound a selflessness of phenomena, meaning that not only is there a mistake that we're making in regard to people, to ourselves and other people, in terms of how we think they exist, but we're also doing that with regard to phenomena other than people. Chairs and computers and our bodies and everything else, that is in existence. So these are 2 very different approaches. I won't be going into them at this time, but you're going to see these folks, the Vaibhashika, the Sautrantika, the Chittamatra, coming up in terms of various tenets that they hold that Shantideva is going to be refuting. And again, in Stephen Batchelor's translation, he does give a little context with regard to each of the schools as they come in. There are even going to be non-Buddhist schools that come into play at various times. But I wanted to at least introduce you to these Buddhist schools because these will be players in terms of the debates that go on in the text between them and Shantideva and him refuting various tenets, various things that they hold. When it comes to the final one, the 4th one, that is said to be the highest thought of the Buddha, the middle way. And within the middle way, we have 2 sub-schools, what's called the Svatantrika, which is the autonomy school, and the Prasangika, which is the consequence school. Of those 2, the one that is in brown there, the Prasangika, is the highest. So essentially what we are studying in the main parts of this text and the voice that's coming back to refute all of these other schools and systems is the Madhyamika Prasangika, the consequence middle way school. So this is said to be, again, the highest thought of the Buddha because it takes the analysis of things to the greatest lengths, to the furthest conclusions that we can in terms of analyzing things and coming to understand through our own wisdom how things actually exist. So I just thought I'd introduce them very briefly. We'll come back to this slide as we, introduce various schools and what have you, and talk a little bit about them before we go into some of the other debates that go on as part of our text. exist. But the Buddha did teach all of these, again, for a perfectly valid reason. Some people might look at it and say, oh, what the Buddha taught all these different things, he must be a lousy teacher because he should have just taught the one final truth, because that's all that we really need to know, right? Well, the problem is not all of us are ready for that final truth, and we need to be led to that by beginning to question first, how do I exist? And then beginning to question, how do phenomena other than myself, and beginning to hear different theories about that, and eventually come to the conclusion through our own reasoning and analysis that this is the highest view, that this is the final exposition of how things exist that the Buddha gave. So all of these things that were systematized after the Buddha's teachings had ended are simply a way of giving a framework to what he taught and what his intentions were. The Buddha's driven by compassion to help sentient beings, and not every one of us is identical to each other. So in that way, we all need different teachings to lead us on that path. Now, if ideally it would be good to learn all of those lower tenet system, how they posit selflessness, and what our ignorance is and how we overcome it before going on to the final view, the consequence middle way school. But nonetheless, most of us come into Tibetan Buddhism, and that's what we get right from the beginning, right? We get that highest view. And so we're already subscribing to that. So there are times I do find myself, when you look down to those other schools and can't believe that they believe what they believe, because it seems so in contrast to this highest point of view. So just know that, again, this is going to be part of what we're going to look at, is kind of understanding the real logical reasons why we can refute some of their tenets, so that we don't just dismiss them because we think, oh, they're lower tenets, they're not the final view of the Buddha, we don't need to pay any attention to them, but rather to be able to know inside and out how to debate those. We aren't going to go through by any means an extensive study of tenets. That is done in the basic program course that is based on the presentation of tenet systems. So that's just, again, a brief introduction before we begin. I want to also do some things that are on your handout. Again, I do a handout for each of these with some short readings of things that I've gotten from various texts that help us to get grounded in the subject. So again, this is all about the perfection of wisdom. So I thought it would be good to start with what we call the mental factor of wisdom. Wisdom is one of the 51 mental factors, and within the mental factors, there are 6 groups. The group that it is in actually isn't a virtuous mental factor. It can become virtuous depending upon how that wisdom is used. But essentially, this is one of what we call our object determining mental factors. It's there when we are getting at an object and discerning its nature to some degree. Whether we're doing it correctly or incorrectly, virtuously or non-virtuously, isn't as much the question. It's just the idea that this is a factor that leads us to investigating things. So as it says on the screen here from Jeffrey Hopkins, knowledge or wisdom, which again is Sherab, individually differentiates the faults and virtues of objects of analysis. It has the function of overcoming doubt. Of course, this is maybe a more virtuous presentation of it, as how we use it on our path. But nonetheless, we can use wisdom to try to, discern how to overcome our enemy by, doing something horrible to them. You can use wisdom in a variety of ways. So then it says, when one analyzes with reasoning and gains ascertainment, doubt is overcome. Doubt can be an affliction, but it can also be just a part of the process towards achieving wisdom, because it is good to have a doubting mind, a mind that doesn't take things just on the surface as being true, but rather wants to investigate them. But if we end up with a sort of two-pointed mind with regard to not being sure that it is this or isn't that, then we absolutely have to overcome that with wisdom. So then it says, thus, the function of knowledge or wisdom is specified as overcoming doubt. Of course, when we begin to investigate emptiness, we may have a lot of doubts as to, is what the Buddha is saying really true? Is that really how things do or don't exist? And then again, we need to overcome that through our continual cultivation of wisdom by investigating more and more. Then Geshe Rabten, in his book on the mental factors, says intelligence or wisdom is a distinct mental factor having the specific function of fine discrimination. It examines the characteristics or the value of a recollected object, something we have to have exposure to it already to recollect it and then investigate it, examining it, analyzing it. This is the role of intelligence, is to kind of discriminate what it is that we are seeing so we know things more correctly. In addition, it has the functions of cutting through indecision and doubt with unilateral certainty. We already saw that earlier in Jeffrey Hopkins' definition. Maintaining the root of all wholesome qualities, both foreseeable and unforeseeable. Again, this is in a more virtuous vein, though as I said, we'll reiterate, wisdom by itself doesn't necessarily mean a virtue. Depends upon what it is that we are investigating and the mind that we bring to that investigation. But if it is a virtuous quality, if it is a correct wisdom that actually sees things as they are, it becomes the root of everything we develop that will be wholesome and beneficial on our path. And then the third one, being similar to an eye that beholds or a lamp that illuminates concealed phenomena. There are a variety of phenomena that the Buddha taught that we just simply are not aware of. In fact, when the Buddha taught phenomena, he taught one presentation was in terms of 3 levels of phenomena. The very first is what we call manifest phenomena, which aren't hidden at all, right? That's all the things in our world that we can know quite easily. Most of them are sense objects, but some of them are even things we can gain through some level of reasoning. But, this is the wide variety of things that sentient beings experience in the world. It's manifest. There's nothing, hidden about it. The other 2 categories of phenomena are both hidden. One of them is slightly hidden. The other is extremely hidden. I'll jump to the extremely hidden because the extremely hidden are things like the intricacies of how karma works. Most of you have grounding in teachings on karma. Karma is incredibly complex, and there's no way for us as unenlightened beings to know everything that's involved in a particular experience. All the various, things that play a role in terms of the karma that we created, what iterations it went through as it matured and developed, the various conditions that allowed it to ripen into that experience. We don't have any awareness of that. It's extremely hidden, so we have to rely upon scriptures to give us some confidence in those. But we will know that to that degree when we attain the omniscient state of a Buddha. And in the state of Buddhahood, then all of that is revealed completely. But for us now, as ordinary beings, we don't have access to extremely hidden phenomena. The other type of hidden phenomena, what is called slightly hidden phenomena, are those things that aren't evident to sentient beings, that they actually have to use reasoning and analysis to discern. And so this is where wisdom plays a particular role, is to helping us to understand, for example, how things that are conditioned are impermanent, that they are changing moment by moment. This is one of the stepping stones to actually gaining a realization of emptiness, but it's not something that is that evident to us. I mean, we do know that things develop and change over time. Look at our own bodies and how much our bodies have aged and so on. We can, see those things in a mirror. But this subtle impermanence, which means that everything is changing moment by moment. If it arises from causes and conditions, what are called functioning things, those are all changing momentarily. And we can discern that through reasoning. We can come to understand that that is reality through investigating, through cultivating the wisdom that knows the impermanence of those conditioned phenomena at this subtle level. So that is one thing, but emptiness is also in this category. It's actually said that emptiness is only slightly hidden, which I guess is somewhat of a comfort, right? Because we've spent a lot of time, many of us, investigating it, and it's good to know that it's not extremely hidden. It actually is something that we can begin to know through developing our own investigation, wisdom, through studying texts like this. This chapter is meant to help us to engage in the teachings from the Buddha at a level that will, kind of give great strength to the wisdom we're cultivating to eventually become a non-conceptual understanding of emptiness, a realization of emptiness that is so critical on our path. But we can know it through simply developing good skills in logic, reasoning, investigation, what have you, simply by cultivating essentially this mental factor of wisdom. So we can't necessarily get it to that degree where we have this direct realization of emptiness immediately, but we certainly can begin to know what emptiness is. So this, again, should be of some comfort in terms of recognizing that we all have the ability to cultivate that with this human intellect that we all possess. So again, this is this third point. It's kind of an eye, the wisdom eye, that beholds, or a lamp that illuminates these concealed phenomena, the hidden phenomena, which the primary one that we're talking about in this chapter is emptiness, is the selflessness of all phenomena and people. So Geshe Rabden continues, he says, intelligence or wisdom can be applied in unwholesome as well as wholesome pursuits, which again, I've already mentioned twice before. It has enabled people to construct highly complex weapons of destruction on the one hand, right? Here in New Mexico, up in Los Alamos, which is, not very far away from Santa Fe, a birthplace of so much, heavy duty thinking that went into creating the atom bomb and what have you. And on a virtuous side, codes of ethical conduct that are quite complex and do have a positive effect on people and their behavior and the welfare of other beings and so on. But by far the most important role it plays is that of discerning the nature of ultimate truth, which is one of the two truths we'll be discussing later, selflessness. I do want to say something about this word selflessness before we go too far, because, of course, when we use the word selfless, sometimes in our culture, we mean it's more of an attitude of putting oneself to the side and being focused on others. That's not what we mean here, obviously. And we also don't necessarily mean it to apply solely to the self or the person. Sometimes we will use that term to refer to me, myself, the self that is the person. But here, when we use it in the context of selflessness, we're referring essentially to a sort of mistaken identity that is within the person, but is also, we hold to be within all phenomena. To kind of think that there is this inherent computer, the inherent person, the inherent whatever, that something exists on its own, from its own side. So again, when we say selflessness, we're going to see this as a general term that is used just like emptiness to refer to any phenomenon, whether it be a person or other phenomenon, that we mistakenly think it has its own identity. We are holding on to something about it that is not there. It's a negation. Both emptiness and selflessness are negations. They're said to be actually non-affirming negations, meaning that they refute something, but they don't put anything else in its place. So we are simply just trying to refute this mistaken idea that we have around people, things, everything that exists that we think has a self, has an identity from its own side, that it actually lacks. And this, of course, has been a mistake that we've been making since beginningless time, according to the Buddha. We have had this ignorance through the force of never constructing any sort of antidote to it. It's been there, they say adventitiously. It's actually a quite nice word for it. It means that because we haven't set up any opposing forces, it continues to just abide, continue to just be a part of our mindset. So we've had this ignorance and been under its control and believing that there is a self of persons with regard to ourselves, a self of phenomena with regard to everything around us. And we relate to everything from that vantage point of thinking things have that self-establishment, that they are existing on their own, that they set themselves up and so on, different ways of describing that mistake. But this is what we are refuting in the various systems. Again, in the Prasangika, Madhyamaka, the Consequence Middle Way School, we refute it at the greatest level by saying there is nothing inherent within anything that establishes the identity of that thing, that everything is coming from the force of a mind that is imputing or designating that. We're going to see a lot of this coming up as we go through this chapter. So don't think that you have to get all these words tonight, but essentially this is a mistake that we're making that needs to be refuted. Why? Because as long as we operate from that sense of an inherently existent me and an inherently existent you and everything else around us, we're going to keep creating and perpetuating our suffering, our problems, our dissatisfaction. Moreover, we're going to be blocked from being able to benefit others. The wisdom realizing selflessness or emptiness has to be cultivated for either goal, whether we want to attain our own liberation or whether we want to attain enlightenment, which of course is the goal that we're holding to in this course, as well as in the FPMT. All of our studies are done with that motivation of bodhicitta. So let me go back to the screen. Again, I want to end a little early so I have some time for questions. And I'm going to try to do that for most of these classes because I realize with the complexity of the material that we're going into, I want to be sure people have an opportunity to ask any questions. So again, the most important role that wisdom plays is that of discerning the nature of what we call ultimate truth, selflessness, emptiness, thusness, suchness. There are different words for it. The ones that you'll mainly see are selflessness and emptiness. Both for the inference, meaning through our logical reasoning, as well as for the immediate or direct perception of selflessness, which is what I was describing earlier, which is a highly advanced wisdom realizing emptiness. A keen intelligence is the vital factor in reaching a comprehension. Nevertheless, without being mounted upon the firm concentration of mental quiescence, calm abiding, it alone, that wisdom alone, lacks any power to cause one to progress along the path to liberation. So hence, this gives great credence to why we studied concentration and why it's presented prior to wisdom, because we need to know how to develop a very stable mind that can be the basis for developing this special insight into emptiness, this wisdom factor. So again, we touched on that a little bit at the end of the last class, but I'll talk a little bit more about that at this time. Similarly, mental quiescence or calm abiding and the various other levels of concentration also lack any liberating power by themselves alone, right? If we attain concentration, but we don't unite it with any real powerful wisdom, it won't do much, right? Thus, it is essential to combine the stable, firm concentration of mental quiescence with the intelligent discrimination of what's called here penetrative insight or special insight. The Sanskrit word is vipassana. And for mental quiescence or calm abiding, it's shamatha. So these two forms of meditation or mental states need to be united. You need to have a union of calm abiding, a very stable concentration that can stay on your object for as long as you wish, completely undistracted, and then unite it with this deep insight into the nature of phenomena, the nature of things, realization of emptiness. So then it says, generally, wisdom is a mental factor able to correctly discriminate the object of analysis. When this is conjoined with bodhicitta motivation, it becomes a perfection of wisdom. This is what I was mentioning in the motivation tonight, right? What makes these into perfections, which is essentially, they aren't perfected until you attain Buddhahood. They're giving the name of the result to the cause, but we can still practice them. They can be the path perfection of wisdom, where we develop that understanding that eventually culminates into the mind of a Buddha. But we need bodhicitta motivation in order for that to happen. That is kind of what we call the method side of the path. And then we have the wisdom side of the path, which is this wisdom realizing emptiness as well as knowing other phenomena, knowing everything, eventually becoming fully omniscient. These two are essential. They're like the two wings of a bird. The method side, that is bodhicitta, and the wisdom side, which is our realization of emptiness and all the other levels of knowledge that we need to cultivate. So remember that there was a verse talking about each of the six perfections in chapter 5 and talking about how they are purely developed mentally. This one is quite obvious too, right? As well as concentration. Both of those, we can see that they're really developed in terms of what we do with our own minds. In that verse, Shantideva said, even those who wish to obtain happiness and overcome suffering will wander with no aim if they do not comprehend the secret of the mind, the principal dharma. Secret of the mind, the emptiness of the mind, the ability to know that emptiness with regard to all phenomena. This is what we have to realize. In commenting on that, Abhat Darkpa Gyaltsen, which was another older commentary I had, said, wisdom is also contingent upon the mind, because even those who wish to obtain unsurpassed happiness and overcome the sufferings of psychic existence, again, those who are on the Hinayana path that want to achieve their own liberation, will wander blithely without any aim wishing for them if they do not comprehend this truth of the ultimate secret of the mind, since no person teaches the principal dharma or the supreme meaning to inappropriate vessels. So essentially, if they don't cultivate the wish to kind of understand how things actually exist, to know the secret of the mind, the secret of how all phenomena exist, they will never achieve that result. They'll wander without any aim. It won't be able to achieve the result that they seek. A few other things I want to cover that are also in your handout. There are 3 divisions of the perfection of wisdom when it is taught in the Lam Rim, the stages of the path. The wisdom perceiving the ultimate, which is what we are studying here, but the wisdom perceiving the conventional, which means everything else that exists. That too is knowledge that we do have to partake of and culminate in the mind of a Buddha. The Buddha's mind doesn't only know emptiness, it knows all phenomena. It's an omniscient mind. And then the one that is particular to the Mahayana motivation, the wisdom perceiving how to benefit others. This is often what we might call skillful means. The ability to know exactly how to help others comes when one has developed their wisdom to a greater degree. So when we know not just the ultimate emptiness, but also know conventional, all the things that exist, and have a deep knowledge of the workings of karma and all the other things, well, then we can benefit others much more. So just briefly, the first is the wisdom perceiving the true meaning of the emptiness of inherent existence of self. See, like in this context, self is used as referred to the person. In these true inherent existence of the person and phenomena, which would be phenomena other than the person, either directly or by way of a conceptual image, because that's how we first learn about emptiness, is using our conceptual mind to kind of decide upon a meaning of emptiness and cultivate that and refine that. That's a conceptual image. That's how our conceptual mind works, is with an idea of things. And so we have an idea of emptiness, and eventually that becomes a direct perception of emptiness, which I mentioned earlier. That happens further along the way. The second division, conventional, is the wisdom understanding the 5 major fields of study: grammar, medicine, art, logic, and philosophy. And of course, philosophy would be the main one in our Buddhist practice, as well as logic. But the other ones are also things that we should endeavor in as we can. But obviously, philosophy and logic are the main ones that we want to know inside and out, so we can develop and cultivate a deeper understanding of conventional phenomena and what have you, as well as other fields of study, Geshe Loden includes. The third is the wisdom enabling you to skillfully benefit others in this and future lives. That's that, again, wisdom knowing how best to benefit other sentient beings. Then one other thing to point out is this relationship between the 5 other perfections that I went through earlier and the perfection of wisdom. Geshe Loden says, a person with a sound and attractive body, but who happens to be blind, is handicapped in their ability to achieve things. Like that, a person who has the practice of the other 5 perfections, but who lacks wisdom, will be unable to achieve spiritual development. Again, I alluded to this a bit earlier, so I don't need to spend so much time on it. It is wisdom, he says, that enables one to discern what to practice and what to abandon, what is virtue and what is non-virtue, what will benefit others and what will not. Wisdom enables you to achieve benefit for both yourself and others. Without wisdom, enlightenment recedes into the distance. As the condensed perfection of wisdom sutra says, the millions of blind who are without a guide do not know the way. How will they enter the city? Without wisdom, the 5 perfections have no eyes, and without a guide, you cannot reach enlightenment. To indicate, actually, let me stop here for a second. So the idea here is, again, that if we practice the other 5 perfections, you can develop concentration and do all these amazing things, be completely patient with other people, have great morality. But that alone is not going to get you to enlightenment. Remember, once more, we have these 2 wings, these 2 essential components. Most of what we've already looked at in terms of the other 5 perfections is essentially method. Now, sometimes they lump concentration with wisdom because obviously we need that, as we saw, as a foundation for developing wisdom. But nonetheless, you need concentration also to develop your bodhicitta, to develop your compassion, all these other qualities that are part of the method side of the path. But essentially, that one wing is not going to get you to enlightenment. You have to unite it with the wing of wisdom. And it's so important, as we're going to see, because without that wing of wisdom, there's no way to remove what is obscuring you, what is obstructing you from attaining enlightenment. You need this other side, absolutely. They work in tandem, just like the 2 wings of a bird work together to allow the bird to fly to its destination. So it's actually, very good analogy for what we're dealing with here. But the method side actually includes a lot. But without the wisdom, we'll never get to the destination. So then I've got a couple more quotes on this from Kensur Yeshe Tupten, a wonderful book called Path to the Middle. That's a commentary on the first part of chapter 6 of Chandrakirti's text that'll come up a number of times in our studies, to indicate that the collections of giving and so forth, which are other than wisdom, progress to the ground that is the fruit, namely Buddhahood, in dependence on the perfection of wisdom. Chandrakirti's entrance to Nagarjuna's treatise on the middle way says in verse 6.2, just as a person having eyes easily leads all in a blind group to their desired destination, so here also the mind of wisdom, taking hold of virtues that lack the eye of wisdom, goes to the state of a conqueror. So again, the wisdom is like the eye, the guide that guides these blind practices that are on the method side that don't have complete understanding of things. Again, we can have great understanding of things in terms of our conventional practice of them, but if we don't have the ultimate understanding that is developed by wisdom, then we won't be able to achieve that state. We will be blind, unable to get to the destination. Just as one-sighted person easily leads all of us, that is, an entire group of blind persons, to a place where they wish to go, so also at this point on the path, awareness, the perfection of wisdom, fully taking hold of the good qualities of giving and so forth, which themselves lack the eye, seeing suchness or emptiness, goes to the state of a conqueror, the fruit, namely Buddhahood. So that's how we actually get to the goal. And it's one of the most important factors. Those on the Hinayana path don't develop the perfections, the other perfections, but they have to develop the wisdom realizing emptiness to get to their goal as well. They too will be kind of blocked from that because it is the essential component to help us to remove these obstructions and attain our desired result. 4, the perfection of wisdom unerringly perceives correct and incorrect paths, because it knows that wisdom that knows exactly how things exist and knows when someone's not in line with that or not actually realizing that, and so on. Bodhisattvas, oh, now I didn't realize I put quite so much in here about this. Again, you can read this on your handout as well. But this is Tsongkhapa talking about how this enhances each of the other 5 perfections. Our perfection of wisdom enhances generosity, because even when they give their flesh to someone who asks for it, bodhisattvas are unaffected by such thoughts as pride, discouragement. It is as though they were taking a cutting from a medicinal plant. It's not like they're actually cutting something, flesh from their own body to give to a being. This is because their wisdom makes reality manifest. It also affects their ethical discipline, their morality. With the wisdom that sees the troubles of both psychic existence and the peace of nirvana, they accomplish ethical discipline for the sake of others' welfare. So they practice pure ethical discipline. Patience, through wisdom, they know the faults of impatience, the merits of patience, discipline their mind so they're not overpowered by suffering and others' misperceptions of them. Sorry, I must have changed the typeface or something and I left a dash in there. With wisdom, they understand well everything at which they joyously persevere. This is the 4th perfection, perseverance or joyous effort. So their perseverance brings great success on the path. And then the 5th, the meditative stabilization or concentration. And through wisdom based on reasoning, they accomplish the supreme delight and bliss of the meditative stabilization that is fixed upon the reality. They combine that deep concentration with the wisdom realizing emptiness. Okay. So in terms of calm abiding and special insight that I alluded to earlier, we do have a little bit in your handout on them as well. So again, we could practice meditation of insight into emptiness, vipassana, straight away, but our mind is as unstable as the flame of a butter lamp in the wind. So our meditation is constantly disrupted by random thoughts and forgetfulness. Therefore, to be able to meditate forcefully on emptiness, we must first develop one-pointed concentration. So just pointing out again the necessity of having deep concentration to actually make our meditation on emptiness effective. When we have achieved this, we shall be able to meditate on emptiness or on any other object we wish. Our mind will be like a heavy stone, which stays just where you put it. The Sutra of Cultivating Faith in the Mahayana states in regard to the same topic, this is from Tsongkhapa's Lamrim Chenmo, children of good lineage, this list should inform you that faith in the Mahayana of the Bodhisattvas, and indeed everything resulting from the Mahayana, comes from accurately reflecting on facts and meanings with an undistracted mind. Again, you can meditate on all these different things, but if the mind is constantly distracted, not able to be placed single-pointedly, we're not going to be as effective. An undistracted mind is mental one-pointedness, the serenity aspect, that is, calm abiding, while accurate reflection on facts and meanings refers to discerning wisdom, the insight aspect, that is, special insight. So again, thus you must achieve all the good qualities of the two vehicles, either the Hinayana or the Mahayana, through both sustained analysis with discerning wisdom, that's again the wisdom that has to be united with meditation, concentration, one-pointed focus on the object. You do not achieve them through one-sided practice of either analytical meditation, where we are analyzing, gaining insight, or stabilizing meditation, where we are abiding in that firm concentration. Having studied and meditated on the stages of the path to enlightenment to the point of joyous effort, you must then engage in the practice of concentration, and in particular that of calm abiding, which again is what we studied in the last chapter. Without some attainment of calm abiding, it is not possible to attain realizations. More importantly, calm abiding serves as the basis for generating special insight. To completely eliminate delusions, one needs the special insight that cuts them at their very root. Training in calm abiding is the actual way to gain the perfection of concentration. Special insight is where, having attained calm abiding, one engages in a particular form of analytical wisdom that induces the bliss of pliancy, and with that analyzes to discern the nature of the object of meditation. It's the actual means to gain the perfection of wisdom. So I'm just reiterating some of this because we did talk about it at the tail end of chapter 8, because otherwise, we might think, well, just having an understanding of emptiness is going to be good enough. No, we have to, bring it together with this very deep concentration. Without that factor of stability, it's going to be very hard for the wisdom realizing emptiness to penetrate more deeply into our minds. But as I said earlier, concentration is also necessary for so many other topics in the Lamrim. For us to gain what are called realizations, we need to have a union of these two, calm abiding and special insight. Without those together, our meditation is going to be very ineffective. We'll develop some understanding, some superficial understanding, but won't be able to take it to the much deeper level. So again, I put this on the handout, and I'm presenting it to you simply so that you gain some confidence in your ability to do that, but also an understanding of how you need to go about doing that. All right, we actually get into the chapter now. So again, we are going to be working with the primary text is Gyaltsep Je's text, which I didn't check out at the website, but I'm sure that is out there as well. But this is the text that we've been using. It's got commentary on all 10 chapters. So the commentary on chapter 9 will be going through. There are 167 verses in chapter 9, which constitute the outline of explaining the chapter. And then there is, as usual, an explanation of the title. But you'll notice even that we usually generally call this the way of training in wisdom, but it actually says the wisdom that is the nature of superior insight. That's because, once more, even though I delineated 3 types of wisdom, right? Wisdom realizing the ultimate, wisdom realizing conventional, wisdom realizing how to benefit sentient beings, it's the first one that we're going to be talking about here. That is actually, how do we develop that special insight into emptiness? Because again, that is so critical, so crucial to our development on the path. So let me just do a little bit of the text so we at least get into it before I open it up to questions. This is divided into, if you go to page 1 of the text, there's a little bit of an introduction that I'm going to come back to in next week's class when we talk about the two truths. But this very first outline is called Showing that Those Wishing to Attain Liberation Need to Generate the Wisdom Realizing Suchness. Remember again that we do have 2 types of practitioners that I've alluded to earlier, those on the Hinayana and those on the Mahayana. Even those on the Hinayana who wish to attain their own liberation, self-liberation, need to generate the wisdom realizing suchness. So In regard to that, the very first verse of the text of this chapter, the Muni, which is a reference to the Buddha, taught all these branches, meaning everything that we just talked about, all the 5 perfections that preceded this, all the trainings of the Bodhisattva that lead up to the perfection of wisdom, taught all of those for the purpose of wisdom. In fact, I've even heard some teachers say that we can say everything that the Buddha taught was for the purpose of helping sentient beings to realize emptiness, because this is the way out. Without realizing emptiness, you can't attain liberation, and you certainly can't attain enlightenment, which is the full state of Buddhahood. So the last 2 lines, therefore, those who desire to pacify suffering should generate wisdom. So let's go to the text. And again, I haven't been putting the text on the screen, rather kind of assuming that you have it in front of you. Again, this will be the main text that we use. I didn't have it on the book list because it's all supplied to you. Again, that should be something that you have access to via Shantideva's website. So in terms of this on page 1, there is an argument. Again, this is a very common way, and we're going to see this a lot in this text, is arguments in this chapter in particular, arguments being put forward by different proponents, and those, or I'm sorry, opponents. Those opponents kind of put something forward, and then we, kind of slap them down. We say something that is in opposition to what they said. So the argument first is, because we need to attain enlightenment to pacify all suffering in the continuum of others, we need to realize suchness. So this is kind of, again, the Mahayana perspective. Because I want to become a Buddha, well, then I need to attain this realization of emptiness, that is knowing selflessness at the deepest level. But why would one need to realize suchness to merely pacify the sufferings in one's own continuum? Now, this is actually a little more detailed because it's rooted in some of these other tenets that I mentioned. All of the tenets, excluding Prasangika Madhyamaka, which is the system we're studying, all of them say that you actually don't have to realize a deeper form of emptiness or selflessness to be free from samsara. They propound a coarser view of the person that is refuted, that maybe I'll explain again at a later point. But essentially, they mean that there's a coarser form of ignorance that needs to be removed just to become free from samsara. But if you want to become a Buddha, then you have to realize a deeper form of selflessness. This is true especially for the Mahayana schools, the Chittamatra, the mind only, as well as the other middle way school. But nonetheless, there's this misunderstanding that could be there. And this is even brought out in the footnote, saying this questioner could be a Swatantrika Madhyamaka or a Chittamatra who accepts the possibility of complete enlightenment, but does not assert the need to realize the selflessness of phenomena to attain individual liberation. So there will be those practitioners who are simply intent upon their own liberation. They just want to get out of samsara, attain the state of nirvana. Do they need to realize this full, extensive view of emptiness, selflessness in order to do that? That's essentially the question. The answer is, the protector Nagarjuna said, and this is a quote from Precious Garland, actually verse 35, the first 2 lines, "For as long as there is grasping at the aggregates, for that long there is grasping at the I." So again, the aggregates is a term that most of you should be familiar with. There are said to be 5 of these aggregates or heaps. These are said to be the basis for a person. We have the first one being the body, which is usually called the form aggregate. We saw these in the recitation of the Heart Sutra, right? There's no form, no feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, consciousness. These 4, from feeling through consciousness, are all mental. They're all essentially what constitutes the mind of a being. So when we consolidate these, we can say there's physical and mental components, or the mind-body complex that we often refer to as the basis for a person. So essentially, those are going to be held to be inherently existent in the same way that the person is that is designated to those, the person that arises in dependence upon those. So we have this sense of an I in relation to these. This is how the Buddha teaches that how things actually exist, what's called dependent arising at the subtlest level. There's just this concept of an I that we think of in relationship to these aggregates. There's no real I there. There's only an I that is designated to this collection of stuff. And that's the only way that the I has ever existed. Well, we have a false conception with regard to the I, but we're also having the false conception with regard to the mind-body complex, the aggregates. And of course, this is what Prasangika Madhyamaka teaches, is that we have this error that's being made with regard to all phenomena that is keeping us in samsara, but it is also keeping us from being a Buddha. So whether one wants to attain individual liberation or whether one wants to attain complete enlightenment, we have to realize the selflessness of both the phenomena that are the basis for the person, as well as the person that is designated to that phenomena. So what I'll do is I'll probably start with this verse again when we resume and do a little more. I've got some slides on it, but since we got about 7 minutes before we conclude, once more, since it's a lot of terminology and a lot of stuff being thrown around, I want to see if there are any questions at this point before we conclude tonight. No? So let me talk a little bit more about this ignorance again and just review what most of you have probably already discerned in terms of your own study in the Lam Rim. This ignorance that is the root of our suffering isn't just a misconception with regard to the I, though that is what's playing the most pivotal role. We think we are real and exist in this concrete way, this independent way, and then we have reactions to the things around us that are unhealthy, that aren't grounded in truth, aren't grounded in reason. On the basis of those roots of ignorance, everything else in samsara develops. And so all of our various other thoughts are generally together with ignorance, whether they be virtuous or non-virtuous. Unless we've gotten rid of that ignorance, they're only going to give rise to samsaric experiences. They're only going to give rise to what we call contaminated karma, karma that is together with that ignorance. And that's what brings about all of the variety of experiences in samsara. The good rebirths, the bad rebirths, the good experiences, the bad experiences. They're all arising in this sort of tree of samsara that has its roots in this ignorance. So if we want to achieve even our own liberation from all of this and end our own suffering, your own little tree of samsara, well, then you have to undermine that ignorance that is at the root of all of it. Therefore, you have to remove ignorance in regard to anything that is misperceived, not just the person. That is where we get into most of the trouble, because we think we're real, and that's why we react in these ways to other things in our lives. But we also have to have that overcome that ignorance that's clinging to the basis for the person, the mind and the body, and of course everything else in our phenomenal world as existing truly or inherently. Otherwise, again, we can't attain liberation, and we certainly won't attain enlightenment. So I just thought I'd point that out in case, just to get grounded back in the basic understanding of how Prasangika Madhyamaka sees this. It's the same ignorance that's operative, whether we talk about what's keeping us bound in samsara or keeping us from becoming a Buddha. Okay, any comments, questions? Yes, Francesca.
Yes, in one of the slides, 5 or 10 minutes ago, something like that, there was that emptiness can be realized directly or with conceptual image. And you said something about the conceptual image. Can you explain better?
Sure.
Directly and the other?
Yeah, let me talk a little bit about that. When we talk about different kind of minds or different forms of consciousness, one way of dividing them up is in terms of conceptual and non-conceptual. The conceptual mind, which is what we have generally operating, certainly in our mental consciousness, because remember, there's the mental consciousness and there's the 5 sense consciousnesses. The 5 sense consciousnesses are all non-conceptual. In other words, the data that appears to you through, like, the images you're seeing on your computer screen, the colors, whatever, all of this is appearing in an unfiltered way. It's like a raw data that is coming into your eye sense consciousness. Then your mental consciousness begins to formulate all of this. Let's talk about the words I'm saying rather than the visual image. The words that I'm saying are all these string of words that are trying to, get you to see a particular meaning. All of those are simply sound that are coming into your ear consciousness directly. The non-conceptual awarenesses all have this direct perception that is knowing things in that way. The conceptual mind, on the other hand, is always getting at things through this image or this idea of things. So you're hearing the sounds are all coming in that you're formulating in your mental consciousness through your conceptual mind into an idea of what I'm saying. What I'm telling you right now in terms of developing a mental image of that, that's what you're doing as you are listening to me, is you're conceptually constructing something that is what I'm referring to as this donchi or mental image. It's the idea that the conceptual mind is always knowing things indirectly. The conceptual mind can only know things indirectly. The mental consciousness can have direct perception, and that's the goal of our spiritual practice, is to develop what's called yogic direct perception, which is when our mental consciousness, which was knowing things through this mental image previously, that mental image falls away and we know emptiness directly. We know it without this medium of a mental image. So mental images are how we use our conceptual mind all the time, according to Buddhist epistemology, how things are known in various parts of our mind. So whenever as I'm speaking ideas throughout the teachings, but even if I were to ask you, for example, to think about your mother of this life, think of her face. You're going to bring to mind an image of her face, or think of her voice. You'll bring to mind an image of what the sound of her voice was. And so you can bring to mind those things because you have a conceptual mind that has sort of taken a snapshot, if you will, of that phenomenon and relates to it in that indirect way. But the sound of your mother's voice isn't appearing to you right now, nor is the face of your mother, because there's simply an image of it. So there is a level of falsity involved in our conceptual mind because we think that we're actually hearing our mother's voice in a sense, but we're not actually hearing our mother's voice. We'd have to have our mother here and her voice being, said to us before we could actually cognize it in that direct way. Instead, it's all cognized through this medium of a mental image. So when we talk about emptiness, when we learn these various reasonings, and as we go through this text and kind of understand emptiness more and more, we keep fine-tuning our mental image of it, our idea of what emptiness is in our mental consciousness. Eventually, that sense of this idea of emptiness falls away when we're in deep meditation in what's called a meditative equipoise. We're going to see this term coming up in some places in this chapter. A meditative equipoise is when you sit down in meditation and based on the stability of the mind, having that level of concentration that we alluded to earlier, this mind of calm abiding, when it's united with special insight, and it no longer is conceptual, when we have fine-tuned it to that degree, you have a direct experience of emptiness. And what that's like, I only know from reading various lamas and what they say. I don't have any knowledge of that myself, and most people who do have that knowledge don't even want to talk about it. They don't profess to have it, So it's hard to say what that experience is, but essentially what they say happens at that juncture is that emptiness, which before was again through the force of this mental image, that image falls away, and emptiness in the mind realizing it become like water poured into water, where there's no differentiation of subject and object. It becomes what we call a non-dual awareness. This is the goal of at least one of the temporary goals of our practice, to fine-tune our understanding of emptiness together with a deep concentration to eventually have our initial direct perception of emptiness, which then begins the process of removing all of these obscurations so that we can attain liberation if you're on the Hinayana path, or attain enlightenment if you're on the Mahayana path. So essentially an image or a conceptual idea, or any of these terms that are used sometimes, meaning generality or generic image, different ways it's translated. This is just referring to the medium, the way in which the conceptual mind knows things, is always through an idea of things that isn't the real thing itself, but is based upon some sort of experience of it. So we will have develop, a conceptual idea of what emptiness is long before we have the direct perception of emptiness. Does that help, Francesco?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, good.
Explain a
Thanks
lot.
for that
Thank you very
question.
much.
Yeah. Sneh, did you?
Yeah. So Francesco's question prompted this
Okay.
thought, which is the sense consciousnesses are non-conceptual, but when you speak, is it really my non-conceptual consciousness? I feel like that is conceptual. Like,
Well, yeah. So what's happening? That what they say is happening is that at when they sort of divide things down, and of course you could have infinite divisions, I suppose. But in Buddhism, they talk about 1/65th of a finger snap. So a finger snap, however, the duration of a finger snap of a healthy person, they say it's I don't know why, rather than somebody who's really weak who just makes I don't a finger snap divided by 65, which you can't even imagine what that is. That's kind of the moments of mind that are occurring. So you would be getting your ear consciousness has to be involved if you're going to hear the sound of my voice and the words that I'm saying. So you are kind of that ear consciousness is not thinking because it's not a conceptual mind. It is a direct perceiver that is hearing the vibrations of the words that I'm my own voice and whatever that are being transmitted and you're hearing in your own ears and what have you. That is operating, but your mental consciousness is kicking in right away and analyzing all of that. And so that's where they almost seem to be working in tandem. And even like when we have multiple things happening at the same time, which of course this is also an example of, but if you're watching a movie and say you're tasting the popcorn while you're watching what's on the screen, while you're hearing what they're all saying, while you're thinking about the plot, you can have all of this seeming to go on at the same time. But actually, when you get down to individual moments, you have them kind of sequentially giving you various data that you're then analyzing, that you're working with in your conceptual mind and so on. At least this is one way it's spelled out. I have seen some teachings with people who say that there's no problem with saying that these things operate together. But there are some issues that would come up, and maybe we won't get into those tonight. If you study that whole topic of kind of Buddhist epistemology and how these mental factors and minds work together, there are some consequences that you'd need to analyze in regard to that. So what's happening in a nutshell is you're hearing everything through your ear consciousness. All of that information is coming in raw data that is simply the vibrations of those molecules that create sound. And then that sound is being analyzed really quickly by your mental consciousness that is then constructing concepts about all of it. This is how we relate to our world. We always have those two kind of working in tandem. Now, you can have stuff that's solely in the domain of the mental consciousness, the conceptual mind, that where we are thinking of various things that don't necessarily have a referent to something outside. I mean, look at human imagination is pretty vivid in terms of being able to construct things. But essentially, most of what we do is we receive raw data through our five sense consciousnesses that comes in directly with no conceptual framework, no generic image, and then it immediately gets translated into a generic image that the conceptual mind starts working with, constructing that, fine-tuning that based on what's being said or seen or whatever is going on. Does that make some sense?
Yes, and I was just like wondering, for that yogi who has been able to cultivate direct perception, like in meditation, when they hear a sound, like that, the conceptualization is shut down and it's like hearing music, like you just can hear something without having to process it. I don't know. I was just thinking out aloud.
What they actually say is if you are you're having a yogic direct perception of emptiness, you are in that mind that is directly realizing emptiness. It's like water poured into water where there's no differentiation. Nothing else appears. In fact, in that book I quoted earlier from Khentsur Yeshe Topten, he actually says that if an atom bomb were to go off in the vicinity of this bodhisattva in meditative equipoise, they wouldn't hear it. They would be so single-pointedly focused and immersed in, absorbed in emptiness that nothing else outside of that appears. So they don't have any ascertainment of sounds or tactile sensations or anything else that would be going on in the world around them, if that's what your question was getting at.
It was, and it's so amazing to have that example is like, wow.
Yeah, when I first read that, that's why I found that a really interesting book, because Anne Klein sat down with this amazing Geshe and just had him talk about emptiness and all the various facets of it based on Chandrakirti's, first few verses of chapter 6. And he gives all these really kind of interesting perspectives on things. But anyway, yeah, that was one of them that I remember from that So again, it is important to have these understandings. This is why, again, so many of our basic program subjects kind of intermingle. And that's why it gets to be hard, because we end up having to re-explain things that maybe people would study and, learning about the mind, awarenesses and knowers and things, or learning about the tenet systems. But this chapter in particular is going to be one where we're going to need to bring in a whole lot of stuff to make sure there's some comprehension of the material, because otherwise your eyes will glaze over, whatever the word is, and then you'll, not really get what we're trying to get at with some of these descriptions. So, yeah, Jennifer.
I don't know if we have time for this, maybe next time, but that raised I guess a subsequent question. If the meditator is, meditating on emptiness, and it goes back to the nirmanakayas of the Buddha. So, with my ordinary mind, I'm like, all right, if someone asks His Holiness a question, I would assume that, it's there's the sense consciousness being translated to conceptual consciousness, and then, giving a answer back. But if, His Holiness is a Buddha, what is actually happening? How is the recipient listening? How is the recipient getting an answer? Does that question make sense at all?
By recipient, you mean the person who is
asking the question and they're receiving an answer.
Okay. Wow. There is a chapter on the mind of a Buddha in the book, The Two Truths, that I'm going to be quoting from next week when we talk about the two truths. A Buddha's mind gets to be a very strange phenomenon because it doesn't work like our minds, and so our mind doesn't have, our mind has conceptual framework for almost everything we do. We have some direct perception of things, but mostly we're thinking all the time, thinking about this, thinking about that. A Buddha has no conceptual mind. And so when you have an appearance of a Buddha, like say, if we do hold that His Holiness is a Nirmanakaya, an emanation body of a Buddha, well, then that is a Buddha's consciousness that is appearing in form, and it doesn't require a conceptual framework at all. It has complete knowledge. In fact, the omniscient minds of Buddhas know not just what's happening at the moment or what's happened in the past, they also know all future phenomena, which is a bit mind-blowing too. So I would say, His Holiness would know already what question is going to be asked. He puts on sort of the show of listening to it and, having the translator translate it, and all these things, because that's our karma. That's what we need to see in order to relate to His Holiness. And then His Holiness formulates an answer using his speech and, maybe at times to change the words or do things like that, which once more is due to our own karma and our appearance of an ordinary being before us, that then gets, conveyed to the person in a way that hopefully meets what that person needs in terms of their meaning and kind of gives them the answer that they're, that they have the karma for. I mean, when the Buddha was teaching, obviously he didn't give the exact same answer in some situations because some people weren't ready for a deeper answer. So I don't know if that explains what's going on any better, but you start talking about Buddhas and these emanation bodies of Buddhas, and they say that all of the consciousnesses, whether it be a sense consciousness or the mental consciousness that's knowing things directly, they're all omniscient awarenesses. They're all knowing things in their entirety. There's no conceptual mind involved.
Thank you.
So I don't know. These might lead to more questions in our minds than they lead to answers, but it's impossible to know a Buddha's mind. But you might take a look if you do. That is, I didn't put on that list, by the way, that book list, any of the peripheral material that I'll be citing occasionally that you might find useful, because obviously, there's only going to be passages from those that I do cite. This discussion on the two truths is going to be about the first 39 verses. So there is certainly some merit to going to a book like Guy Newland's on the two truths. But after he begins talking about the two truths, he also gets into refuting various things from some of the lower schools and mind only and all these things. He gets into a whole bunch of tangents. And so, again, I don't necessarily want you all to be feeling like you have this whole pile of books that you need to go through on the side, but do know that Guy Newland's book is really quite helpful. Anyway, okay. Any final questions? Because we really do need to wrap up. I'm sorry I'm keeping some of you quite late on the East Coast there. By the way, next week I will be on the East Coast with you because I will be at my mother's visiting. I'm finally going to go see my mom. So anyway, very happy about that. So I'll be in Indianapolis, so it'll be the same time as you. And by the way, I do want to thank people for the contributions that some of you made to the offering that was made on behalf of the students. Thank you so much. It was very kind of you. So let's go ahead and do our dedicating verses for tonight, our dedication prayers. And again, we'll be sharing these slides from tonight on the website as well. So let me page down, scroll down to where those prayers are. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel Bodhichitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. And then the prayers for our precious teachers, first bringing to mind His Holiness and Lama Zopa. But as we recite these two prayers for them, include in your thoughts all of the spiritual guides who are helping sentient beings in whatever tradition. May they continue to abide in this world with good health and very long lives so that we and others can benefit from their guiding presence. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Then for Rinpoche, you who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. And let's dedicate for anyone that we're holding in our hearts right now, all those beings who we know who are experiencing obstacles or illness, who are dying or who have died. And we can certainly think about places in the world where there is great suffering right now, like in India and Nepal and that whole basin there where there's so much spread of COVID, so many deaths, so much suffering, but also all the other places in the world where they're suffering from illness and other things going on. Dedicate very strongly for the welfare of all of these beings, so their suffering might be alleviated immediately, and that they will have all the causes and conditions that lead to their true peace and happiness. And may all beings find perfect happiness from what we've done here tonight. Okay, so again, if you do have the time to at least read in Practicing Wisdom, I would read the first bits of it, at least into the first few verses, because I will be going through that in the next class and then continuing on. There'll be some sections that'll go a little faster and some a little slower. As I recall from the last time I taught this, it took me like 2 or 3 classes to get through like the first 4 verses, simply because there's a lot of kind of introductory information and things that need to be spelled out in terms of terminology, because not everyone has the same foundation of study, and it's understandable. So I'm happy to do that. Like I said, I want to make sure that everyone stays on board with it and gets some sort of meaning out of what we're saying, as opposed to getting lost in the dust or something. So I hope you can bear with me if you have heard some of these things before, recognize that they're for the benefit of all. So, all right. Thank you all so much, everyone. Have a good week, and I will see you next Monday. Okay.
Thank you, Gendon.
Thank you, Don.
Oh, you're very welcome.